Welcome to the Juggling Without Balls podcast. My name is Monica Parkin and I am your host. And every week on the show, I'm going to be talking to powerful, successful women who juggle it all. And when I say juggle it all, I mean everything: kids, health, aging parents, careers, relationships, you name it, we're going to talk about it. So stick around, grab a cup of coffee, pull up a seat, and enjoy the show. Hello, jugglers, and welcome to another episode. My guest this week is Jocelyn Bystrom, former teacher turned writer and mental health advocate. Jocelyn is here today to talk to us about her journey of recovery through 7 years of medical investigations for a set of mysterious and debilitating symptoms that left her with daily seizures, cognitive decline, and central apnea, as her body forgot to tell her to breathe. It's an amazing story with a wonderful message, and I look forward to hearing more and sharing it with you. Welcome, Jocelyn.
Thank you. I'm so excited to talk to you. For those of you who don't know, Jocelyn Bystrom is currently writing a book about her journey. We're going to talk about what it's about, but I've known Jocelyn for a number of years. She used to be my kids' gifted education teacher for 2 of my kids many years ago. That's where I first met her. And I've been following her on social media and LinkedIn and see that she's been going through this really interesting journey. And I thought it would be a great topic for listeners because it's really about sometimes trying to do too much. So obviously when I first met you, you were a teacher. Let's start at the beginning and what sort of led you down that particular career path?
I think first and foremost, I graduated when I was only 17 and I was pretty uncertain. I knew that I wanted to go to university and I applied for several different faculties, thinking whichever one I got into, I would go to. And when I got into all of the ones that I'd applied to, then the decision was forced. And I think potentially because my mother was a teacher and I admired what she did. And your parent is always your very first teacher and the most important teacher of all. And it was what I knew, it was what I had grown up around. I ended up in education and it wasn't really a conscious choice, but I think it was a really good fit for me.
Awesome. And I know a few teachers whose parents were also teachers, and it's just my opinion, but it seems like there's some of the better teachers that I've met. It's they've grown up around someone that's passionate about it and they've carried that passion into their own careers. So that kind of leads me into my next question. So I was going to say that you're not teaching due to health issues right now, and you admit to being a career-driven workaholic perfectionist, in your words. How do you think that mindset impacted some of these health issues and some of the things that have caused you to have to step back from work?
Significantly and wholeheartedly. They were the underlying essence of what caused my challenges all the way through. If you want to contribute, you have to be up for the challenge yourself. And as a teacher who set the bar high and was working at the time earlier in my career, as you mentioned, with gifted education as a challenge teacher, working with students who were of high ability, I push myself. I work hard. I'm driven. Right now, even though I'm off work, I'm writing a book. I will always be that intense, passionate person that drives myself hard to work hard, achieve, and take action. And so that's probably not going to change regardless. However, what I'm learning to do is create a better understanding around balance for myself. And what happened was that in 2014, I unexpectedly, as an educator, lost my job. And not only lost my job, but lost a sense of...
Sorry, was that the job as a challenge teacher?
Yeah, it was the job as the challenge teacher. And it came upon really unexpectedly. I'd been in the position for 5 years and I felt that I was safe and secure and maybe naively and wasn't. It just was through a staffing process, but it completely blindsided me. And I had, as a child, been to one school after another, never really found myself rooted, which caused me to have to use some childlike strategies to cope and to manage. that served me well as a child, but they were no longer really serving me well as an adult. And so when I lost this whole career that I'd worked so hard to achieve, and I'd had so much post-secondary education to acquire, completing a master's in gifted education, I was devastated, and I didn't have the tools to understand how I could grieve. And I was just grieving and at a loss that I didn't know how to manage and didn't know how to deal
Yeah.
with.
And you're almost losing part of your identity. And I remember you were deeply into that position. You were an advocate for the kids. You were not just educating kids, but educating the community about the needs of your kids and advocating for them and teaching them. So like you weren't just a teacher that just showed up and went home. You were all in. And so I
It
can
was.
see how having that ripped out from is almost like having your security blanket taken away and part of your identity, like a piece of yourself, having to put that away quite unexpectedly.
It truly felt like a part of me had died. When we experience grief, it's not only the taking away of our identity, it's just there's that missing piece. And all of a sudden, I just didn't feel worthy. I didn't feel like I deserved to have this great job that I'd worked so hard for. And I just, my mind was just reeling with misunderstanding and anxious thoughts and distorted thinking because I didn't have that support.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to seek support or find support that I needed at that time. And as a result, what happened is my body ended up keeping score. And it was really not apparent to me that some of the physical symptoms that started showing up after that time, it didn't occur to me that they had an underlying mental health
Yeah.
component.
So let's talk about that. And then I was just going to add too that not only the loss of the position, but the relationship with those kids, right? Like you've built these relationships with the expectation that you're going to see them the next year and the next year, and you're going to watch them grow. And all of a sudden that's taken away from you too. So it's like you're losing a family members in a way. But moving on to what you're talking about. So at some point, stuff started to go a little bit sideways. And so there were some symptoms that you ignored. In hindsight, what should you have been paying attention to? If you could go back and look at that time through a different lens, like what was the first indication that something's just your spidey sense is not quite right if you've been listening to it?
Hmm. Exactly. I think there's two parts. There's two parts to that answer. The first is that I think that culturally and as a society, we need to become more aware of our whole body health and wellness in the realm of healthcare above the neck, not just below the neck. So that when we go to the doctor, we can easily pick up a phone and there's no stigma attached to saying, hey, I need an appointment. I've injured my arm. I've got a cut. I've got an infection. There's no stigma attached. We pick up a phone easily. And however, for above the neck, it's a much more difficult to reach out. There's a stigma attached. You're not coping, you're not managing. And so many of us struggle in silence. And 50% of Canadians are going to struggle in the course of their career with their mental
Yeah.
health.
And can I add to that? I had Dr. Janice McLaughlin on a few months ago, and I was asking her about the demographics of her practice. And 90% of her appointments are mental health appointments.
Wow.
90% of
That doesn't
care
surprise me, especially
is
at this
mental health.
time.
Yeah. And what I remember, I haven't had anxiety issues for years, but when my first child was born, I had this postpartum anxiety, but I didn't recognize it as anxiety. I would say, I'm tired, I'm not sleeping, my bones ache, blah, blah, blah. And I thankfully had a good practitioner that said, you know what, it sounds like you're actually having anxiety. And I would say, no, I don't feel anxious at all. I feel tired. And she would say, well, actually, that's because your body's been dealing with this adrenaline dumping and dumping, and now it just can't do it anymore. And so once I actually realized what it was and addressed it, thankfully, that's many years behind me, but it took a very perceptive practitioner. So I think there's people that have issues that are mental health issues, but they're not aware of them because they're manifesting physical symptoms. They don't feel like mental
Exactly.
symptoms. Yeah.
It's so easy to recognize the symptoms of our physical health and not the symptoms of our mental health.
Yeah. Like you say, my knee hurts. That's easy.
Exactly. I recently took a mental health first aid course, which was phenomenal in terms of it it increased my ability to understand and comprehend my own struggle with mental health. But more importantly, if you think of someone that has physical first aid skills and they are driving along the highway and they come across an accident and there's no one there yet, you would obviously stop and you would assess, you'd listen, you'd think through, you'd take those first aid skills that you know and think, I'm not the one that's going to, you're not the one that's going to be doing the surgery or mending the broken bone, but you can certainly do what's required in the meantime until the professionals get there. And in the same way, mental health first aid is critical so that we can help support those people that are having a problem prior to it becoming a crisis, so that just like you, when you're experiencing that anxiety postpartum, you have a sense of someone that can come in and around you and provide some support and care, which says, Monica, you're having these physical symptoms. This might be indicative of anxiety. And
Yeah.
what does help look like for you today with that anxiety?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that we can approach and just really see people and decrease our social distance from people that have mental health challenges and
Yeah.
are struggling with their mental health,
Yeah.
perhaps in silence.
Yeah, I witnessed this the other day. Actually, it's funny that you should talk about it because I've never seen someone do this before. But we were at this online Zoom meeting and someone in the meeting just broke down and expressed that, you know what, I'm just having a really hard time right now. And the rest of us were like, okay, no worries. We'll see you when we see you. And someone else spoke up and said, what? Can I call you later today? Can I check in on you? We can call. Do you have supports? What's your plan for today? And I was like, wow, like she is on this, and not in an invasive way, but she was just attuned to the fact that something's not right here. And I'm just gonna say, can I call you later today? Can we talk about what do you have in place? Do you have someone you can call? Do you have someone living with you? What's your plan to get through today? Because obviously you're struggling. And I was so blown away by that. I'd never witnessed that before. And it really touched my heart. And I thought, wow, more of us need to have this in our toolkit. It almost makes me want to cry right now. It was very moving, right?
Yeah, I felt very grounded after taking the mental health first aid course. And it's unfortunate that right now it's an expensive course. And some people that were taking it through their work and their employers were paying for it. But it needs to become more accessible so that we can all take it and it's, within our means to do, because I now know how to approach someone who was like me. I wish when I had lost that job that the person on the other end of the phone would have said to me, Jocelyn, this is tough. It's completely normal that you are going to struggle with the loss of this role that you highly prized and valued and treasured.
Yeah.
I'm going to suggest that you potentially find someone to talk to about that today. And I needed a roadmap and someone who was in a position to give me a roadmap would have been what I needed in that moment. And a moment ago, when I said it was a two-part answer, that's the other part. We need to use our own talents and resources and skills and strengths to do the best we can with what we have. But we also require supports from others who can come around us and nurture us and give us that a little bit of lift and that spark of hope when we're struggling and we cannot clearly see the roadmap for ahead.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Every workplace has to have a certified first aid person. Maybe as part of your vision that every workplace has a certified mental health, like someone with their mental health first aid kit. You know what I mean? Because we need someone, if someone slips or falls, someone has to be qualified according to WCB. Maybe every workplace needs someone that can recognize the mental health issue and provide support or direction, right?
I think one of the things that I am most passionate about coming out of this experience with is that I want to be an advocate for change, and I want every educator in our district, provincially, to have mental health first aid for themselves, because we're emotional caregivers. We provide emotional labor, as do healthcare workers. And this is something that is necessary in our self-care prevention toolkit.
It almost would make sense for it to become a universal thing in every workplace, really.
It should be part of the university education for
Yes.
healthcare and for
Yes.
teachers, as well as for not just for teachers and like physicians. It should be in place for healthcare workers, for support staff in schools, like everyone, every stakeholder in the school community that interacts with students
Yeah.
and parents and the public.
Yeah.
It would be in their best interest and the students' best interest if those people were trained.
So something wasn't going quite right. Did you have some physical symptoms? Let's start with that, and then we'll walk through this whole process of getting a diagnosis and figuring what was going on.
Okay. Starting in 2013, I actually had an EEG, which is a map of the brain basically, and it showed that I had some abnormal epileptiform waves and discharges.
So, sorry,
However,
stop.
at that time, nothing more became of it. Initially, they thought they looked epileptic. However, it nothing ever came of that. Was just the initial incident.
Sorry, can I just back up for 1 second? So, what led you to go get that EEG? Did you have something that made you go to the doctor and say something's not right?
I was having some challenges with vertigo and balance and dizziness
Okay.
and those kinds of things, but no connection or thread. And
Okay.
then in 2014, after I lost my position, although I did return to work in a different position, it wasn't the treasured one. To be clear, I still had work, I, but it wasn't the one that
Wasn't your passion?
I was still passionate about working with students. It just wasn't what I had so identified with.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
And so afterwards, my anxious brain went into overdrive. And because of childhood experiences that also left me using strategies that were not necessarily healthy for adult mental health and lacking skill in really being assertive for myself. I was really good at being assertive for all my students and for colleagues and for everyone in my path, but not for myself.
Yeah.
And I just let my needs go. I wasn't looking after them. And so what happened was I started experiencing this really odd jerk. And it was like my upper body, my trunk would like unexpectedly just jerk back, and it caused a lot of pain in my low back. It only lasted a second, but it was unexpected and I didn't know why I was experiencing this. So then I started the pathway of going through my GP and saying, having this weird thing happening, but I don't know why. And that took a long time to gather momentum. But in the interim, the frequency of those jerks that I didn't know how to explain or what they were called, they increased in intensity and frequency. Initially, they were happening once in a while. And then in a period of about a year or two, they started happening every few seconds and many times a minute. So that I couldn't stand unsupported without, as my neurologist at that point said, perhaps get yourself a cane or a rolling walker. And I was like, wait, what? I'm 50 years old. I'm not ready for a rolling walker or a cane.
Yeah.
But I couldn't stand up without holding on. And I was still teaching at that time.
So, was there concern that maybe you might have MS or early
There
Parkinson?
was. Well, that was part of the increasing struggle because every time I went to a new specialist, and I went to many, they would say, this is very unusual. This is very unexpected. Seems very rare.
Not reassuring.
Not reassuring. We checked for MS. We checked for Parkinson's. We checked for tumors, brain tumors. All of these really life impacting, life shortening ideas were planted in my mind that might be possible, but nobody really knew. All of the evaluations and assessments and observations all came up. I was healthy. So that made it really difficult because I have a very curious brain and I really wanted clarity. I needed clarity. Why was my body doing this very strange thing that was causing me significant physical challenges? It was making my ability to work difficult. It at that point I was teaching part-time because I needed a physical rest day, because holding my body with that much tension to make sure that the jerk didn't happen all the time was causing postural problems, and I was exhausted all the time just from the mental not knowing whether I had something that I was going to die from, or the unknowing was harder.
The uncertainty of it would certainly jack your anxiety up, like not knowing what's going on and probably thinking of all these worst case scenarios, even though everyone's saying you're fine. You're like, clearly I'm not.
And it was a long journey. Eventually, my GPs did put in a referral for the UBC Movement Disorders Clinic, which is run through the Parkinson's Research Facility at the University of British Columbia. And I was like, Parkinson's? I have Parkinson's? So off I go to the Parkinson's clinic. But it took me from the time of the referral to my first appointment was well over a year. And so you're waiting and you're stewing and your symptoms are increasing and you're getting worse and worse. Everywhere you go, people are saying, what is wrong with you? Because you can't stand, you look uncomfortable and you are holding on all the time. And so when I finally got to that appointment, I received an initial diagnosis for the first time. And it was 4 years from the time that I started having symptoms till I experienced that first diagnosis. And all through that time, I had been on 3 or 4 different medication trials to try to reduce the symptoms that I was experiencing, and none of them seemed to be helping. And then after I got a diagnosis, so I found out they're called myoclonic jerks, I was diagnosed with propriospinal myoclonus, which is just a long name that didn't really give me any clarity, and to find out that it was a really rare thing and that I had it. So for a year until my next follow-up appointment with the movement disorders clinic. And then I was reassessed and I was told, no, you don't have propriospinal myoclonus, you have orthostatic myoclonus, which means that you only have the jerks when you're standing and you don't have them at any other time.
Interesting.
Okay, another new diagnosis, more medication changes. My body is not managing these medication changes. A lot of the medications are causing cognitive decline, and I am starting to lose my ability to focus and concentrate, remember names, and this is hard in the workplace. I'm still working.
Still working
so
through this. Wow. Okay.
I was still working. I worked part-time, and then intermittently I did go on leaves at my neurologist's request. I would have chunks of time, but then I'd always be trying to go back because I love my work. So I was always trying to be well and be back to work. And then when in 2019, I believe it just all became too much. I was cognitively, I was struggling. I was working with students that were fabulously wonderful, but had complex and big needs. And the stress level was really exacerbating my symptoms. And my neurologist said, it's time. So she pulled me out of the classroom. And then it was time for me to say goodbye again, more colleagues. And so now not only is my physical body a wreck, but I've lost the job I loved, the career path I loved, and now I'm no longer teaching. So I don't have anything anymore. I'm at home with all of these physical symptoms. It's coming to the end of 2019, and I start retraining while at home to go back to work as a teacher librarian, thinking that if I retrain, I'll be able to use all the skill set that I already have to work in a situation where it's an incredibly intense job and it's so important in today's libraries, which are no longer libraries of the past. So that brought it basically up to the end of 2019. I'm off work. I'm going back. 2018, going back retraining. So I get really excited. I go through a gradual return to work program and I go in slowly and I step back in as a teacher librarian, and I'm super pumped. I'm so excited. I go back in September of 2019 after almost a full year of being off. And during that year, I spent the entire year, the driven, focused person that I am, trying to lose weight. I lost 30 pounds. I started running. I was trying to get myself fit. I thought, if I am going to lose my physical body, I want to do everything I can right now to get it to a place of strength so that if I am going to lose my ability to walk or my physicality, it's from a place of strength and not from a place of weakness.
Right.
So I spent that whole year just working diligently, insanely to get strong. And at the end of it, you've previously had Karen McKinnon on, and bless her heart, I said to her, I need pictures of myself. I need a picture of this strength because this might be my last opportunity to look at my body strong and capable before it declines. That's the mental health set I was in. I basically knew that my body was getting worse and worse. And I just wanted something on the wall that I could remember being strong. So she took a lot of pictures. And when they came back, there were two that were just, they grabbed me. The first was a picture of my physical strength. And the second picture was one that she captured that I didn't realize she'd even taken. And it was a more telling story. It captured the strength and the peace and calm in my face. And it was then I began to make the shift that I realized that my strength comes from the calm that I feel in my mind and not in my body. You need all of it.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of a really significant shift of learning how to navigate the non-negotiable things that I needed to make sure I looked after, and to shift from a physical health perspective to a gratitude perspective where I focused on what was going well, even though things were going so badly.
Yeah.
Because in January of 2020, I got the worst call ever from the neurologist saying, you've just had another EEG. It doesn't look good. And you may no longer drive. You may no longer work. And that was really hard.
That's a tough one to sit with, eh? Yeah.
It was a really tough one. So that felt like the end. So also the beginning of 2020, also at a time when my mother has been moving through her dementia journey and she moves into my home. We invite her to move into our home. So within the course of a week, January 27th, my mother and I both lose our driver's licenses. I lose my job, my work, my career. And I start teaching my mother and I how to take public transit so that we can have some tiny sliver of independence to get around.
Yeah.
So I also spent 3 of those months in early 2020 going through her apartment of 20 years, sorting and cleaning and moving her out into our home and becoming her full-time 24/7 caregiver. I was also experiencing really significant mental health and physical health challenges of my own.
And really needing to rest and
Needing to rest and recharge without any time. And then add in the layer that there's also a pandemic happening.
Yes.
And you can't go anywhere. And it's just that much more complicated. I started to really bottom out. That was the sign that not only was my physical body taking a big hit, my mental health was taking a big hit. It became really hard for me to make the decision that needed to be made around my mother in terms of when do you choose to put a parent into care?
Yeah.
And I always knew it was going to be tough. I was her power of attorney. I am her power of attorney. I continue to be her power of attorney. And there were days where I was being admitted to emergency and coming home to be a full-time caregiver.
Yeah, it reminds me of that whole oxygen mask thing. Sometimes, in order to care for others, you have to care for yourself first. And it sounds like that's
Mhm.
a decision you're facing. In order for me to, you have to look after yourself and your own recovery before you can care for others. And it sounds like at that point, you were still trying to care for someone else without that realization that you actually have to be healthy to do that for someone else.
Exactly. And yet it doesn't change how difficult it is for a child to
Mm,
make a decision for a parent to lose their freedom
yeah,
and go into care at a time during a pandemic when putting them in care means 2 weeks of isolation and then not seeing their loved one for potentially a year.
yeah. And for someone with dementia
And
that
I
you,
was the one that had to decide that. I thought, if I put my mother in care during COVID, I'm hearing on the news, I won't be able to see her again. I'll never
yeah,
be able to hug her again.
yeah,
She'll not know my name by the time I potentially do get to see her again. And I couldn't do it.
no,
So I kept her with me and I cared for her. And every day my husband came home from work and he was my caregiver.
yeah,
Literally,
yeah,
I was a care recipient at the same time I was a full-time caregiver.
yeah.
And at that time, I reached out through the Family Caregivers of British Columbia, which is an amazing group. The Family Caregivers of British Columbia are a phenomenal support system and network. And I'm actually now a Zoom host for some of their programs on a volunteer basis because it was just life changing what I was able to learn about helping myself to help others.
Yeah.
And when I finally ended up for the second admission into the Comox Valley Hospital, they admitted me thinking I was having a stroke. I underwent a hot stroke protocol in the Comox Valley Hospital after my husband taking me there because I was having tingling in my face and I experienced what's called a thunderclap headache, where they think you are having a stroke basically. And it was really terrifying. And I ended up there 7 days. People started talking to me, Jocelyn, it's time to put your mother in care. But it would still be weeks before I could actually do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So is she in care now? Did you ultimately make
She
that
is in
decision?
care now. She went into care in September of 2020. She was with us through till the end of September. And at that point, as my children will tell me now and have told me now, and my husband, they didn't know that I would live till the end of the year.
Wow. Wow.
That's how bad things were.
Yeah. And what an
So
interesting.
it's a wake up call when you realize you have to choose your own life over your mother's.
Yeah.
And I did.
Yeah. But what an impossible decision.
It was very tough.
You have to make that choice. Yeah. Yeah. So now moving forward, here's a question actually that I ask other people, and maybe it's hard to find it now. Obviously, we've heard what the challenges are. Do you think there was a silver lining in there for you anywhere?
There are many. There are many. I think it's important to say that after mom went into care, my physical body continued to decline from September of 2020 until February 2021. I started experiencing seizures and seizures that would last between up to 30 minutes in length. Unlike most epileptics, because I'm not an epileptic, unlike most epileptics, I am fully cognizant and aware throughout the entire seizure. And sometimes I'd have up to 8 in a single day. And it wasn't until I finally ended up in the Vancouver General Seizure Investigation Unit, fully incapacitated. I couldn't fall asleep without having a seizure. I could not walk for more than 6 or 7 minutes without having a seizure. Uh, I was experiencing central apnea. My brain was forgetting to tell my body to breathe. I was in really rough shape.
Wow.
And when I went into the seizure investigation unit, everybody in my circle had been traumatized by that point. My friends just told me last week, Jocelyn, you don't realize how impacted by trauma everyone is. It's not just your husband and your children, it's your extended family and all your friends and all of the people in your community that care about you. It traumatizes all of us, which is brings me back to the silver lining, and that is that coming out of the seizure investigation unit, where I was told, much to my husband's horror, that I was assessed by 3 teams. I was assessed by the respirology team because of the apnea I was experiencing. I was assessed by the psychiatric team just because of the trauma that I was moving through. And I was assessed by the neurological team. And the neurological team came in first after they completed all of their assessments. And was their news. Jocelyn, this is the best news we ever get to give anyone. There is nothing neurologically wrong with your brain. In fact, you can drive. And my husband stood in horror in that room, listening, hearing, after I just had 12 seizures in a few short days, that I was going to be able to drive. He was like, "What? No?" And I was horrified because I knew that I was certainly not going to be driving because I wasn't well. And it was interesting because that's what I was told. And the neurology team left. They were really happy to be able to deliver wonderful news. And then the psychiatry team came in and delivered really unexpected news. And I'll tell you exactly what I was told.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I made a very strong connection with the doctor that I met in SIU. He was a game changer, a life changer, and a provider of a spark of hope because his words, although life changing, were filled with compassion. And he said, "Jocelyn, there's a lot coming at you. It's a severe condition. It's a big deal. However, there's hope and you're going to get better."
Nice. Yeah.
And with that, I just experienced a whole shift.
Yeah.
The lens with I saw all of my struggle, I finally had the clarity 7 years later that I needed to start on the journey to wellness. And it shifted because I understood at that point, A, that there was nothing neurologically wrong with my mind. And it was so reassuring to hear those words that there was nothing neurologically wrong.
Yeah.
The abnormal EEGs that I had for 7 years were reclassified
Oh,
as a very rare normal. So,
really?
interestingly
Cool.
enough, all of the things that they'd been medicating me for these abnormal epileptiform waves and discharges, they'd been medicating to prevent further loss, prevent more seizures. And all of the medications that they had me on were actually creating a bigger problem.
Right. So you were actually a variation of normal, and they were treating that variation of normal, which is now leading to a new cascade of symptoms. Is that am I understanding?
That's correct. And so once neurologically we knew that all was well and that they actually reclassified, they had a panel of people across North America, specialists, determined that I'm a very rare normal.
Wow.
Then they took me off all the seizure medication
Yeah.
and sent me home, much to my husband's horror. He's,
Off you
"What?
go.
You're coming home? Off all medication?"
Yeah.
I believe I was a recipient of a miracle that day
Yeah.
because I have not had a seizure since.
Really?
And in my mind, scientifically, there's no explanation for that.
Yeah.
Spiritually, there is.
Yeah.
And I hold on to that.
Wow.
The most important piece of that coming out of learning that you have a psychiatric diagnosis, and not only one, but 4, I was diagnosed with FND, which is functional neurologic disorder. And the Twitter version of that is that your brain sends mixed messages to all of the rest of your body and causes physical symptoms
Yeah.
because it gets messed up.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
was diagnosed with FND, I was diagnosed with PTSD
Yeah.
as a result of both childhood trauma and the loss of my career.
Mm.
And it's interesting to me that I always think of PTSD as being something you get if you've been in a war or you've experienced massive trauma or you've
Yeah,
the
interesting.
unfortunate.
Yeah, interesting you should say that because after my first daughter was born, remember I said I had this postpartum anxiety, but I also I had a horrible labor and delivery C-section experience. When I would start having flashbacks, I'd have to go to the hospital for blood work. I couldn't get myself in the door. I'd be having these meltdowns. And again, this amazing family doctor I have said, I think you actually have PTSD. And I'm like, I don't have PTSD. I haven't had any trauma. And she's, you were in labor for 36 hours. You had a C-section. All these things happened that were beyond your control. And now, as a result of this, you are constantly reliving this experience again and again. And she was able to refer me to someone, and we worked through that. And I haven't, had those flashbacks or experiences for years. But thankfully, I got a very quick. Someone was on it, noticed it, and got me the right resources, and I was able to move past that. But I was like you. I was like, no, PTSD happens to soldiers. It doesn't happen to women that are stuck in labor for 3 days. That's not a thing. But it was a thing for
But
me.
that's part of learning about mental health is you
Yeah.
need to realize that trauma happens to many people and the circumstances are very individual. For someone else who hadn't had prior childhood trauma to lose their career, they may have responded very differently
Yeah.
than the way my body and my mind responded.
If you'd known other things or had other resources, you might have taken different steps. But for you in that moment, in that time, it was the tipping point for you. It was the straw that broke the camel's back, to speak.
That's right. That's right. And so when you asked me about silver linings, it's taken me a long time to get there, but there were many. I think first and foremost was the time I had with my mom.
Yeah.
My mom has been a treasure to myself and my family for a very long time. She was a warrior single mom, and she has been ever present in the lives of our children as a grandma and just over the top. And so having her here in her, what I'll say is last year of really any clarity, gave us some really beautiful time. My mom had never been someone who was physically affectionate, and she had become this nurturing, more relaxed, wonderful, open mom that I could embrace.
Yeah.
But through this period of her dementia, she was still at a stage with frontal temporal dementia where the form of dementia she's still experiencing, it robs you of your vocabulary and your language and your ability to communicate. Otherwise, her physical body looks completely perfect. If you see her, and I pick her up 3 times a week and we go all over the place, and still to this day, I'm still her caregiver and I still
You're
take care of
driving,
her.
by the sounds of things, you're driving
And I'm
along.
driving, so that's a silver lining. There are so many silver linings. My increased understanding around my own mental health and my own awareness have enabled me to have more authentic relationships, to be more compassionate and kind, to have an attitude of gratitude rather than a fixation and focus on what's not going well.
Yeah.
And to realize that when I do go back to work, I'm going to have a lot of incredible tools in my kit, not only for myself, but those that I can add